As another St. Patrick's Day approaches, I wonder to myself what participative Irish Christian citizens should be thinking about on the edge of our national festival. It's, of course, very right that we have a chance to join with others in the celebration at home and abroad of all that Irishness means in terms of culture and heritage and indeed of spirituality. But as one thinks of the Christian contribution to the national identity and the national debate, sometimes one is assisted by what I might call a happy liturgical coincidence. And this particular week, the week of the third Sunday in Lent, brought to our attention a long gospel reading from the fourth gospel, the extraordinary encounter of Jesus by the well with the Samaritan woman. It's so edgy, so politically incorrect in so many ways, one just can't go into it all now. But as in other narratives in the fourth gospel, details matter. And there's one little detail upon which I always like to focus, and which indeed helps me as I think my St. Patrick's Tide thoughts. Jesus and this woman who's an outsider, both because of her gender and because of her Samaritan background, and there they are alone at high noon by a well, talking about indeed sharing a vessel, so inappropriate, and going on to talk more deeply about the meaning of living water. And then Jesus very insightfully gets involved with a discussion about aspects of her more colourful private life. It's an extraordinary story. But when the woman grasps who she's with and rushes to tell her friends all about it, the writer of the gospel records she leaves her bucket behind. She leaves her bucket behind. In other words, the very thing that was the initial purpose of her being at the well is now jettisoned because she has entered a new chapter of experience. Something that was basic to her, as it were, purpose, role, rhythm in life is left behind. She is moving on. And to continue that metaphor, I often say to myself, in my own life, in parochial life, in diocesan life, what buckets do we need to leave behind in order with Christ to move on? And some of those buckets may be very dear to us. They may be like totems. We may even convince ourselves that they are somehow essential to our identity and our purpose, but they need to be left behind. Now, as we come to St. Patrick's Day, I transfer the image and I look at the national life and I say to myself, in our national life, not least as Christian citizens, what buckets do we need to encourage the nation to leave behind? I think, in fairness to us, we haven't been bad at leaving behind some of the worst buckets in recent years. We have become much more honest about the truth about ourselves, about aspects of our rather shady past. We this year have been endeavouring, and it is difficult and painful, to leave behind much of what one might call the hitherto silent, unaddressed pain of the Civil War, to deal with those memories properly and to move on. And in other ways too, Ireland has moved beyond what I might call its old hypocrisy, where we tried to persuade the world we were full of virtue, that we didn't do morally dubious things that other nations did. But we know more and more what Ireland was like in the 1950s, the 1960s, and what was really going on under the supposedly morally virtuous crust. In the past, we were therefore very good at what's often today called virtue signalling, giving other people a false impression of our moral purity. But I don't think virtue signalling has entirely gone away. And perhaps that's one of the final buckets we as a nation need to discard in order that we can have honest debate and not evade issues and look at our role in Europe as it is. I don't want to be politically provocative in what is a Bishop St. Patrick's Day message, but just by way of example, and I realise there will be a huge variety of opinions out there on this one, ranging from perhaps a sense of the duty to be a pacifist nation to the sense that military involvement in the affairs and the security of Europe is something we need to be more active about. There'll be a huge range of opinions, but one area where I think we are still inclined to do virtue signalling is the way we cling to the notion of Irish neutrality. It suited us well 80 years ago. It is all to do with military non-alignment, but nonetheless, faced, for example, by the reality of Ukraine, we get into the most extraordinary complications as to whether we are, as it were, while military non-aligned, nevertheless far from neutral when it comes to the actuality of support, provided, of course, it doesn't involve offensive weaponry. All I'm saying is we cannot evade a new look at the whole meaning today of neutrality and non-alignment. It is a profoundly moral question on which people will rightly have very different views. It is a moral question where Christians, I think, have an enormous contribution to make to the public square, but we need to do so and to encourage the debate to be had, because at the moment, as it were, we sit under the security blanket provided by other nations for us at low expense to us, and we say virtuously to the world, we don't get involved in nasty military things. We think, of course, at this time of our defence forces, and they are very underfunded, and all they do, and their honourable role in peacekeeping, and their role civically on St. Patrick's Day. And perhaps that very thought makes me say once again, in relation to the issue of neutrality, are we, by burying our head under the sand yet again, doing, however unintentionally, something of a masterpiece of virtue signalling? So that's the bucket I'd want to leave behind. I think that Patrick wouldn't have been terribly in on virtue signalling. He confronted the society of his day with great courage and honesty and spoke into the public square he faced. Let's be Christians who are truly participative, who truly encourage debate in the public square, who truly want in our church life and in the national life to abandon those buckets that impede honest and godly progress. Enjoy the feast and all the true joys of it.